Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to say it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to get up again to speak to Bill C-3, now in its amended form from committee, on behalf of the great constituents of the Wheat City and Western Manitoba. I do find the discussion that has taken place on C-3 since it came back from committee with these amendments fairly startling. You know, we're going to get into a bit of a discussion about what the amendments are that were approved in a multi-partisan fashion at committee, but some of the comments coming from the government side have been alarming in that this was, you know, this bill was required by a court decision, a lower court decision, and so we should just absolutely agree to everything that the courts say. Some members opposite have even commented that Parliament is not supreme in its ability to make laws on the citizenship question, and indeed once a court has made a decision at all. And we know that that's just factually incorrect, Mr. Speaker. In fact, my colleague from Calgary Nose Hill cited Section 9125 in her speech, which does specifically discuss that Parliament has the power within the Constitution of this country to make decisions regarding the provisions of citizenship in this country. So the facts around that are clear. Whether the Liberal government is going to accept them and accept the amendments that were approved at committee remains to be seen. We know that this government has made a lot of comments about being a listening government, about wanting to work together more collaboratively. They're often griping about previous parliaments and the fact that no one wanted to work together with them. Well, we have an opportunity here where two other official parties in this place have come together and moved together some fairly simple, basic, and agreeable amendments to a government bill, and we sincerely hope that the Liberal government is going to approve those as well and move forward this bill in an adequate and appropriate way for Canadians. We know that the national identity of Canada is constantly under threat. We see commentary around all kinds of different ideals about post-nationalism and globalism and what it means to be a Canadian citizen, how being a Canadian and Canada as a whole fits into that context. And I think the biggest concern that I'm hearing from Canadians is the value of Canadian citizenship. And what exactly does that value, what amount of value do we place on being a Canadian citizen in an increasingly interconnected and interrelated world? You know, I certainly think that this bill, in its initial form, was pretty bonkers, is the first word that comes to my mind. I mean, I don't understand the concept of citizenship that goes on and on and on with having, after multiple generations of having no connection to this country, in many cases having barely or never been here, generation after generation. You know, I have family that have moved overseas, from Europe to the South Pacific, and they are having children overseas. And I know that they are going to make sure that those children have a connection to this country because they believe that being Canadian means something. And it's not just words and a piece of paper. It's about a connection to this place, the actual physical space of this country, and the people that call it home and make up our nation as a community of diverse individuals. And if they expect their grandchildren and great-grandchildren to continue to be Canadian and to be Canadians, that they will make sure that they spend time in this country, even if they choose to live abroad, which is, of course, their right, that they will make sure that those relatives have a connection to this country. So what are the amendments that we put forward that the Liberals are so upset about? Well, for citizenship by descent, the amendment was approved that citizenship will not be granted to persons when neither of the person's parents who was a citizen was physically present in Canada for at least 1,095 days during a period of 5 consecutive years before the person's birth. That goes for citizenship by descent as well as by adoption. 1,095 days, Mr. Speaker, is not an onerous length of time to expect someone who is perhaps born abroad themselves and received citizenship to the next generation to make sure that they've spent some time in this country. Language provisions. We have 2 official languages in this country. And you know, I guess I should just pause here to thank my colleagues on the Citizenship and Immigration Committee, the member for Calgary-Nose Hill, joined by the members from Saskatoon West, Markham, Unionville, and Aurora Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill, for the excellent work that they've done on, you know, putting forward fairly common sense amendments to this bill, but also to our colleagues in the bloc. I mean, those folks are not typically standing up for Canadian citizenship. I mean, by definition, they're a separatist party who wants to be a different country in and of itself. And even they can see how badly devaluing the bill as it was presented to this Parliament by the Liberals was to the value of Canadian citizenship. I mean, even they're concerned about this. So they worked with us to defend language rights, to expect people who are immigrating or who are applying for citizenship through descent or by adoption to know one of the official languages. Fairly common sense, reasonable request. I would expect most Canadians would believe that as well. Whether the Liberals do or not, I guess we'll see, Mr. Speaker. But I certainly think that the vast majority of Canadians expect someone who is becoming a citizen of this country to know either English or French, and that's a fairly reasonable request. We also know that an amendment approved at committee talks about having knowledge of Canada. I was just talking about the example in my own family about how going forward there could be many generations who have lived abroad, who have, you know, under the way this bill was presented by the Liberals originally, who have never spent any time in Canada at all, and they think they should automatically be citizens of this country. We believe that that's a choice that also has to be made, and an understanding of the country that you are a citizen of. This is very simple. Take a citizenship test, a knowledge test based on the citizenship guide that we expect other people applying for citizenship to take. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think it's actually pretty normal to expect. In fact, I know that as C3 was originally presented, we would have been the only country in the G7 to grant citizenship in that fashion. None of our other allies, the most developed economies and countries in the world, would have had a citizenship provision like the Liberals presented it originally. So we've amended the bill to add a citizenship provision so that people would actually have to declare that they don't believe in barbaric cultural practices, for example, like female genital mutilation and other severe violence. We understand in this country that when you want to escape a terrible situation in the country that you're in, when you're an immigrant, that you need to leave the conflicts of that country where you came from. That's not an unreasonable request, and we believe that should be applied to anyone that is obtaining Canadian citizenship from any path. And so these are pretty basic bars that have been amended onto this bill in a multi-partisan fashion. But the main point, Mr. Speaker, is that we believe on this side of the House that Canadian citizenship has value. And with that value comes responsibilities as well as rights. It doesn't mean a blank slate. There are expectations of Canadian citizens regardless of how you obtained that citizenship, and these need to be outlined, which is why we've amended this bill. We understand that there are, adoptive provisions in this bill that for people who are adopted that we agree with completely. But we need to make sure that there is a discussion happening in Parliament and not just decisions by judges about the expectations and responsibilities of people obtaining Canadian citizenship. We feel that these amendments do that. We know our colleagues in the bloc agree, because being a Canadian citizen matters. It has value in the world, and we understand that these folks want to be Canadian citizens that would be affected by the provisions of this bill. So let's make sure that they're joining the citizenship of this country in the right way. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. Alors, le député de Madawaska.
The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is trying to correct historical injustice by remedying the situation of those whose children lost their citizenship. I worked with my colleague at committee, and instead of 5 consecutive years, we're talking about 3 years, which is substantial. Why? Who's someone who lives in Canada for 2 years and then goes back abroad, and things are different today. And then they work abroad, and then they come back to Canada, and they go back and forth. And they spend several years that are significant in Canada for working and studying, and then why would they be eligible to give their children citizenship if they've at least spent 3 consecutive years over a 5-year period? Can my colleague explain why this change was made?
I'm a member for Brandon Souris.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to my colleague across the way. For starters, on the Lost Canadians piece, we agree with those provisions, and that's why we didn't amend that part of the bill. So that provision stands, and I think our Conservative comments at committee stand for themselves. With respect to his example of someone who is sort of globe-trotting for that, here for school, away for school, here for a job, back for a job, etc., those people would have still spent the amount of time that's required by this bill in the country with their going back and forth, whether it's for school or for work, that their children would have citizenship under the provisions of the bill. So that is already clear in the bill. We do not think that 1,095 days out of a 5-year period is an unreasonable expectation, and we certainly hope that the Liberals will support that.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. Alors, député.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The PBO, in his presentation, believes that we're talking about roughly 550,000 people who could obtain the right to vote and citizenship. And my Conservative colleague intervened last week on a very important point with respect to the fact that we don't know how we'll determine the riding where these people will be registered. If we're talking about some tight battles, so it could be an issue. I'd like to know if my colleague has an opinion on that.
The Honourable Member for Brandon Souris.
Well, I think, thank you to my colleague from the bloc for the question. And I think our concern is certainly the 550,000 people at a time when our immigration system is already overwhelmed. I mean, there's no question that the Liberals have absolutely broken Canada's immigration system. And even they recognized it under Justin Trudeau and decided they were going to make some public statements about curbing the flow of immigration into the country. Now they're kind of waffling on that and walking back and trying to pretend like the last 8 years of their record didn't happen. And so we are concerned about the impact of our housing system, our healthcare system, and that will be impacted by, as my colleague mentions, where these people choose to register as citizens if they choose to spend time here. So there's a lot of provisions, which is why one of the amendments in this bill is a requirement of the minister to report as to where these people are registering and how many people have obtained citizenship through the bill.
Questions, comments. Gentleman Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for that amazing speech. He knows and mentioned in his speech that there was a court ruling from an Ontario court that sort of precipitated this whole discussion. So I got a two-part question here. The first is, why does he think the government didn't appeal this decision? And that seems like a strange decision from the government. And if that was maybe smart or not smart. And secondly, if there needed to be a substantial connection according to this court ruling, which makes a little bit of sense, and how our suggestions are maybe a better substantial connection than what the government has proposed. Thank you.
Member for Brandon Souris, in about 35 seconds or less.
Okay, very briefly, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague from Saskatoon West. for the question. Number one, I think it was a mistake not to appeal this court decision at the lower court level when it was rendered. I think there could have been a much better framework and put out than Bill C-3, and unfortunately the Liberals just threw up their hands because they seem to prefer not to make challenging decisions and blame the courts when things don't go their way. We've seen that with other issues, and we're seeing it again with immigration, and so that's the weak way out, but we believe that there is a better path, and my colleagues like him have done an excellent job of putting that forward with these amendments to Bill C-3.